My name is John Vest, and I'm the pastor of Peakland United Methodist Church here in Lynchburg, Virginia. Welcome to Wednesday Church, and we hope you'll be encouraged today. These retellings of Sunday's sermon are fun to do. I need to let you know that this sermon preached a couple of days ago was on a day that we celebrated Holy Communion, the Lord's table. So you're going to hear a reference about that in today's sermon. It's also a twofer. It's not a sermon series where one talks about a whole range of issues. This is actually a very long sermon that I broke up into two parts. So today we'll end with some thoughts to share, some things to ponder until we get together again next week and bring some conclusion to it all. It's been said that it's the little things in life that make a difference. I know for me, a mundane thing, just like going to the mailbox on a daily basis, can be transformed when among all the bills and the catalogs and the sales brochures, I find an envelope that really is addressed by someone's hand. And I open the envelope and there's a card that's not trying to sell me anything. It really has been written by a human hand, and it's a friend or a colleague. And they say, thank you, or I was thinking about you, or I just want you to know. That moment leaves a residue on my heart for the rest of the day. It's a little thing, but it's not. I like getting calls and texts from my children. Amid the crises ones, Dad, my car won't start. Dad, sing money, or my personal favorite, Dad, I can't find Mom. Where's Mom? Every now and then, you get a call from a child going home from work saying, Dad, I was just thinking about you. Just wanted to call. How you doing? Just wanted to talk. That is a small thing, except when it's not. These little things make a difference. And our reading for Sunday came from Jeremiah 1, starting with verse 4, going to verse 10. And if you turn to that, you'll see that it is God calling Jeremiah to special, distinct ministry as a prophet to all the nations. That's important. Out of all the things, all the record we have of God in the Old Testament, there are only 5 instances where God called an individual just like Jeremiah to do a distinct thing. Some people become very prideful when they have a sense of God calling them, or when something good happens to them. Like a child being chosen first on an athletic field, they become somewhat puffed up. It's easy for the athlete who is gifted, who has worked very hard to achieve, let's say, an elite level of performance, to forget all the hard work, to forget that they actually bear a responsibility as a role model for those who look to them and also aspire. We know that's a tension for professional athletes. And I'm not talking about whether it's right or wrong for an athlete to use his or her platform for political involvement, for pronouncements or denouncements about what's going on in society. I do believe that anybody who functions at an elite level, whether it's in the realm of business, whether it's in the realm of public service, whether it's in the realm of sports, you bear a responsibility. You are a role model because there are those who aspire to what you have achieved. It's also an issue for us preachers, to be perfectly honest with you. The pulpit is not a podium. The pulpit is not a lectern. The pulpit stands in the tradition of the Old Testament prophets, the oracles of God. And we talk about things that are eternal. We talk about things that are holy, that are mysterious. And it's easy to forget that we are merely the channels, the vessels through which God works, that it's not about us. Fortunately, we have Jeremiah, who will help keep all of our feet planted firmly on the ground. God called to Jeremiah in a great and powerful way. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. If anybody had a right to be puffed up, it was Jeremiah. He had received what so many of us long for, a clear, recognizable call from God. A friend of mine was wrestling with his call to ministry. He had served in a church as a young age and had taken what is referred to in our United Methodist tradition, an appointment beyond the local church. A gifted writer. If I said his name, many of you would recognize him. I've seen his work in our church library. And he was pondering whether to stay in that appointment beyond the local church or to come back into parish ministry, come back into the weekly return of the pulpit. And he said to me, John, what I want is a letter from God telling me what to do. Don't we all? Like Nancy Jo Batman, who's a writer in the Disciples of Christ Church magazine called Disciple that Aunt Dot used to send me. She said, what we want are answers. We want experiences. We want revelations. And that is what Jeremiah got. His response to the answer, his response to the experience, to the revelation, is really a model for the rest of us, because Jeremiah did not get puffed up by what he was experiencing. Instead, Jeremiah understood he needed to be built up. I don't know how to speak, he replied to that sacred voice that he was hearing. I am only a boy. And God said, don't you say that, which does make one wonder, in the eyes of God, what man among us, what woman among us is anything more than a child in those loving eyes. Apparently, God's call is not about Jeremiah, even though that's where Jeremiah started with it. For us, apparently, God's call is not about you. It's not about me. It's not about us. God's call is about God gifting a person to do what God wants done. That's really what it's about. You shall go to whomever I send you, he told Jeremiah. You shall say whatever I tell you to say, God told Jeremiah. That's a serious responsibility. That is a tremendous load to carry, and that's where quite often we get hung up with trying to answer God's call. We get so weighed down by our sense of that responsibility. We get so weighed down by the weight of it all that we forget what happens next is really the most important part of being called. You shall go wherever I send you. You will say whatever I tell you to say. And then God told Jeremiah, I am with you. I'm told that when the Holgate Bridge across the East River in New York was being built, that as they were putting the great pylons down into the bedrock foundation, right where one of the central pylons was to go, there was an old derelict ship, had been sunken for decades and had been encased by that primal ooze. And try as they might, the ship had to be moved, but they couldn't get it moved until one engineer came upon a brilliantly simple plan. He noticed that there had been a flat-bottom barge going up and down the river hauling stone, massive amounts of stone. And he got permission to use that barge. It was hauled over top the derelict ship and on the floor, and it was chained tight to that derelict ship during low tide. And then they waited. And slowly, minute by minute, hour by hour, the irresistible force of the tide raised that derelict ship out of its watery grave, and then it was easily floated out of the way. I want to suggest to you that every time we receive Holy Communion, every time we step into a worship service, I would even say every time you and I gather on this Wednesday Church Be Encouraged ministry, what we're trying to do is harness ourselves to an irresistible power. I had an experience as a district superintendent that has continued to mold me. And I don't remember a lot of the details, I just remember the outcome. It was during Portsmouth District Days, and we had an issue with one of our churches. I think the issue had to do with an appointment. We were getting ready to appoint a new pastor to a church. For this church, this would be the very first female pastor they'd ever received. And that was an issue for some people. Not only would she be the very first female pastor, she would also be the very first African American pastor. And that added another layer of concern to some people in that congregation. So we gathered, we being the cabinet, me, 17 other superintendents, the bishop's assistant, and we talked about the situation, trying to weigh the needs of the church and the future of the church and the sort of leadership that they're telling us that they need to have to continue forward in service of the gospel. The pastor's needs, the need for the total church to be inclusive, all that goes into consideration. And we determined that we would stay with the projected appointment. And when all was said and done, in front of the entire cabinet, Bishop Charlene Camera turned to me and said, "John, I know this is going to be hard, but I've got your back." And with those words, I knew I could persevere. So all I'm trying to say is, when we respond to God's call, and we do that by sharing this sacred meal, we do that by going to church, we do that by sharing this devotional time together, we are reminding ourselves that God really does have our backs in this life, and that there is a power that if we will harness ourselves to that power, there is nothing that can resist the goodness of God in this world. So friends, if you don't believe God's love and power is irresistible, why do you keep coming back? Why do we share this meal over and over? Why do we share these worship experiences over and over? Why do we have this Wednesday church over and over? I want to suggest to you, it's because God is calling. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that God is calling people out of our congregation. No doubt in my mind that God is calling people who share this Wednesday experience with us. There is no doubt in my mind that God is calling people out of our midst for specialized service. And I'll have more to say about that next week. Until then, may grace and peace be yours.